Robert is Congresswoman Gwen Moore's climate and energy legislative aide. In addition to that, he helps in terms of the general office operation. Fair to say?
Yeah, nope, that's about right. I fill many roles in the office, other duties as assigned as well. Right. So, so to talk more broadly about the American Jobs Plan, which is President Biden's proposal for addressing both infrastructure and climate priorities. As your question mentions here, President Biden did set climate change as sort of one of the main goals of the package, which is very kind of him to do, because all the great work that he proposed be done under that is now up to Congress to actually figure out how to put into a bill. Of course, he put some like framework in for what he would like to see, and sort of the question is what priorities and what goals that have already been proposed by members on various committees are going to be part of that package. Speaking specifically to my boss's work, the Ways and Means Committee, and what they're working on, we've been in talks with the committee for over 2 years now on a green energy tax package and what that would look like. My boss is the author of 2 of the provisions in that bill. We have a not green energy. It is a home energy audit tax credit. So it's a credit that would go to homeowners who receive audits on their homes, regardless of if they move forward with the actual energy saving improvements. They get a credit for having the audit conducted, so that they can be aware of where they can save money on their energy expenses, but also how they can reduce their carbon footprint. The other bill is a tribal energy direct pay bill, which would provide a credit in the amount of what that tax credit would look like for a company that builds a green energy green energy project, essentially giving an option for non-tax liable entities for for the green energy projects that we'd like them to build. It also gives tribes more autonomy over their energy production. As it currently stands, tribes often end up in these sort of somewhat abusive power purchase agreements that don't necessarily work out for them, and don't meet the needs for reducing our climate footprints. But with those 2 things being said, the Congresswoman has also been very supportive of other measures that are included in the bill, just authored by other members. So we have a used EV tax credit that my boss has been very adamant on supporting. We've been very supportive of heavy duty electric and hydrogen powered hydrogen fuel cell trucks, which have both been sort of widely agreed to be the best way to decarbonize that sector. We've also been big on electric bus tax credits, and even a credit for bike commuters, just supporting all sorts of forms of alternative transportation, getting people out of cars, and ideally out of fossil fuel burning cars, and ideally into more sustainable options altogether. We think, though, that there's probably a need to expand beyond tax credits for addressing those needs, which falls into a jurisdiction of other committees. Energy and Commerce has their bill out that has grants for for solar installation, for wind energy. So with those, I mean, with so many different proposals out, it's hard to know where to throw your support behind. So we've just been sort of seeing what those committees come out with, and trying to be supportive in any way that we can in supporting the final passage of those. When it comes to transportation, the Congresswoman has been very adamant on public getting public transportation included in this bill, and increasing the rate at which, just overall increasing the rate at which the Federal Highway Administration and Department of Transportation fund public transit in comparison to highways. So right now it's like, I want to say it's roughly two thirds goes to highway spending, and then a third gets put aside for public transit spending. We're looking to make that more like a 50-50. And I think that that's what this, I hesitate to say, because I actually haven't looked at it directly, but I believe that this final bill will have a much more equalized spending limit between those two. And as we're looking at that, we're also looking at ways to secure EV grant, electric bus funding within that. With the infrastructure bill that most recently came through the House, I believe it's HR 5880. I'm blanking on the actual name of the bill, but we submitted an amendment to increase the percent set aside for low income and minority communities from that bus program, to make sure that when we're providing funding for buses, that it's going to the communities that really need it the most. Because that's sort of that's sort of the underlying theme you'll find of most of the ways my boss has been able to plug into this, making sure that the voices of those disenfranchised individuals are included in the package. And then there was also a question about regional electrification of trains and buses. Electric buses has been definitely a big piece of what we are doing, but the regional trains, I mean, we're generally supportive of that. I think definitely with the way that that President Biden has vocalized his support for regional transportation, I think that that will definitely be a part of the final package. So moving on to some of the I'm sorry, there was one more. There was one question here from 350.org, it looks like, from about taking international leadership in climate change. Absolutely, the Congresswoman is supportive of the US being a leader in the climate space. But I think it's also important to highlight that the US becomes a leader in this space by just doing the work that scientists have been advocating for 30 years now. There's no country right now that's fully meeting its commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. So it's absolutely a great thing if the US can be a leader. I think that where the Congresswoman comes from is, let's show up and do the work we've been asked to do. And if we end up being leaders in that space, that's great. I think one way that the US could be a leader right now is just being more adamant that we need to be collaborating in this space, because it's a problem, it's a crisis that is affecting every single country on earth. So that, I mean, I don't, there wasn't really necessarily a question with it, but I did want to make sure that I addressed that. And then I think this seems to be the section that, George, if I'm right here, that after that, there's a section here labeled Milwaukee City County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity. Is that the one that these questions are specific to that task force?
Yes, and the community is interested, but these are some of the projects that we are planning on working as a part of our climate plan.
Okay, that's actually very helpful. That okay, that changes how I would answer these a little bit, but I'll do my best. So with regard to just the infrastructure on the grid infrastructure, electric grid infrastructure, there are several bills that would potentially address the crumbling infrastructure that we've all come to know and hate so dearly. One bill that my boss is on is the Energy Resilient Communities Act, which is, what that would do is set up a program to set up energy microgrids in communities that are either disenfranchised or disconnected, or really just interested in setting up a microgrid. And that would take them off, not take them off the broader grid, but in times of grid failure or in times of grid reduction, these microgrids would be sort of the solution for how those communities stay online, not online internet, but like on, stay electrified. And that bill specifically only brings in support for, but only support green microgrids, so wind energy, solar. I believe it also provides support for communities that would like to build energy storage facilities of various types, because there are very many at this point. With regard to ending federal subsidies for fossil fuels, Congressman Blumenauer has a bill on this, and that would fall to Ways and Means jurisdiction. We are looking into getting on that bill, but we want to be sure that we know everything that's in it, and that's actually on me. I need to read through it, but suffice it to say that the Congresswoman's very, very interested in taking these subsidies off the books. It's not even, it goes against what you would even provide a subsidy for. It's subsidies and tax support for burgeoning industries like green energy, not for well-established oil industries that have been around for decades. So we're looking into that and generally want to be supportive of taking those off the books as well. Increasing opportunities for solar and wind. Solar and wind will be part of this package as it's passed, whether we go the bipartisan route or if we go the budget reconciliation route. It's a major goal of House Democrats, congressional Democrats, but also the Biden administration. So I'm positive that those will be included, and obviously the Congresswoman throwing her support behind those the best that she can. Although I'm certain there are other members that are sort of being the champions for that issue, but in the ways that my boss is able to be supportive, we certainly are. And then there was a question about ending oil drilling in the Arctic and offshore and on all the federal lands. The Congresswoman is very supportive of ending drilling on public lands. So you can count on her for that.
Robert?
Yeah.
If I might, I understand there was an article in today's paper that said that Biden was against ending the drillings.
Biden has, I would say he's gone back and forth on the issue. It's actually, I think, kind of confusing as to where he stands on it. The Congresswoman, for her part, is very supportive of ending drilling, but can't always speak for the Biden administration and what President Biden himself is saying. I also understand that he has, that the administration has put their support behind continuing certain drilling projects as well. Not drilling, I'm sorry, pipeline projects. So definitely understand how that information is confusing, and we're trying to keep up with it as well. When it comes to drilling, you can count on my boss for her support for ending public drilling. I also believe that it remains a big priority of Secretary Holland, who the Congresswoman, as you know, is very close with. So to the extent that we're able to be supportive of that, we absolutely would like to be. But they unfortunately can't necessarily tell Biden what to do. Not on our own anyway. To move forward, the next question is about the Keystone Pipeline and other areas where the president can act on his own. As I mentioned, banning drilling on federal lands, that would be in his jurisdiction without any congressional action, as would declaring climate change a federal emergency. I mean, we've been supportive of efforts to convince him to do just those things. And I think I'll leave it there. There are definitely things within the climate change goals that are within his power. And I guess the question is, what would be an overstep to the point that courts would intervene, which I'm sure there are. I would be willing to bet that a federal ban on drilling would go to court in some capacity. Though I think it's pretty clear that is something that Biden has the power to do on his own. With regard to line 3, the question, I was kind of confused by the question, because it just says Enbridge's line 3 crude oil pipeline from Canada to the US affects us in Wisconsin.
Yeah, so our question is, as Biden, stopped the Keystone pipeline, is there any discussion of him doing an executive order to stop line 3?
I honestly have not heard that discussion. I know that there are a lot of groups that are doing advocacy in that space. In terms of what we can do to encourage Biden to stop line 3, I know that there was a letter that was circulating that the Congresswoman, we were unfortunately too late to add the Congresswoman to, we missed the deadline, but there was a letter circulating to the Biden administration from members to encourage him to just put a stop to that altogether. But more broadly, like what can other groups do? I mean, continue to speak up and speak with the groups that are advocating against it. Certainly, it presents an additional pipeline presents a lot of issues with the tribal communities that they would affect. There's a lot to lose when it comes to it. So I think we need to continue to encourage Biden to stop it.
Okay. So Robert, I'm throwing a time check in here. You've got about 10 more minutes.
Yeah, wow, that time went fast. Well, how about, would it be okay with you just to open it up to questions so that we...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The vast majority of the people on the line are 350 people.
Gotcha.
More concerned about what you've talked about so far.
Okay.
And what I would ask is that the task force questions you and I work on after this meeting, on another day. How does that sound?
Sounds great. I can draft up I can write some responses too, and I'll send those back.
Thank you. So we'd like to open up the discussion around the issues that Robert has presented to us so far. Would you please use the system of Zoom in terms of raising your hand? And that's under reactions that you can raise your hand. We'd like to follow that so we can get the sequence of things. So I'm going to kind of change the map here so we can see everybody. Any questions so far, please?
George, I'm seeing that there are some questions in the chat already. I'd be happy to start there if that's all right with you.
That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one, EV charging station grants for businesses or on government land. So with regard to EV charging, I know that there will be EV charging funding in this bill, and the infrastructure bill we passed out of the House contained grants for EV charging as well as tax credits, I believe. In fact, I'm sure. No, I'm sorry. That infrastructure bill did not have Ways and Means jurisdiction, so that actually was strictly just grants for installing a nationwide EV infrastructure. For our part of that, for the Congresswoman's part of that, our main concern has been the environmental justice aspect of this. So ensuring that when we're installing these EV charging stations, that they're accessible to minorities, low-income individuals, communities that are often left behind when we look at new shiny new whatever, ensuring that those EV stations are making it into those communities so that when hopefully they're able to use these low income used car used EV tax credits that they have charging infrastructure available to them, and people who are in multi-unit houses as well, who don't, who don't have the luxury of a garage to plug their car in at home. We want to make sure that they have options too. We talked about line 3 already a little bit. Any focus on electric farm tractors? So we have, this actually would be the first time that anybody has raised that topic with me. That is a very good question. There's definitely been mention. I mean, I know that there are electric tractors out there, and that there are that farmers obviously have that concern as they're trying to reduce their carbon footprint. I'm not sure if it's included in this climate package. That is something that I would be happy to look into and follow up on. 50% emission cut. Okay, it's a long one. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so this question is with regards to Biden's goal of 50% emission cut by 2030, and sort of how realistic that is, especially with fossil fuels being so much cheaper than alternatives. I'd say one big step would be to take the subsidies off the books for fossil fuel for the fossil fuel industry. Doing that would, I don't know that it would drastically increase the cost of fossil fuels, and I think that's sort of the point. Is why are these subsidies here if they're not really necessary? But what it would do is create an incentive structure that works in the favor of these alternatives. Your biofuels, which I know those are contentious, but more specifically for electric vehicles, for getting for finding these alternatives that are not reliant on carbon emitting fuel sources. I hope we get on track for it. I mean, that's all I can really say. I don't know how realistic it is. I feel like if we really get everyone in line and get everyone understanding that is the best way to address, to get a jump on addressing this crisis, I think that is something that we can hopefully do. And if we really get, if we get the fossil fuel subsidies off the books, and we create some better reliability in the tax credits for these other producers who are coming up with alternative solutions, I think that there's definitely a path to 50% emission cut, even if it doesn't hit 2030 exactly. And I'll leave that there.
So just a time check here.
Yes, I know. I'm running out of time.
You are, and so I'll mention the things that we're gonna go work on in terms of the task force, and we'll share that with folks. But you are running out of time, and we want to thank you so much, Robert. We really
absolutely.
And folks, if you've got other questions, please put it in the chat, and I'll forward that to Robert. After the meeting. Are we all good on this? Okay. All right. Again, thank you so much, Robert.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. Have a good night.
Good night, and have a good meeting early in the morning.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Okay. So family, I just wanted to mention with that time limitation there, we forwarded them our questions and concerns, and he addressed those mainly with the time limitation. We also forwarded him concerns of the Milwaukee City County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity. And I just want to mention these to you so that you're aware of them if you're not. These four areas are among 10 areas that our task force has set a priority on in terms of our planning process and seeking funding for. And so Robert and I will continue that, and we'll share with the list later on. The American Jobs Act, he mentioned. Tammy Baldwin has been significant in promoting in sponsoring this act. And our concern is green jobs. And how do we move forward with green jobs as a part of the American Jobs Act? The second area that our task force is planning on is net zero passive housing. And we're planning to build a factory up in the 30th Street corridor around Century City. We're planning on building a factory for prefabricated units and beginning with a plan of building units to cover at least a half a block and then to move from there. And the city has applied for EPA grant funds to develop plans for, and this is important, demand side financing for these homes in terms of how do we get the financing to pay for this with consumers. The city is also exploring U.S. Department of Energy loan guarantee program for this project. The third area that's important and kind of was brought up in some fashion in terms of our task force plan is housing retrofits. We anticipate that the administration will be proposing funding for energy efficiency retrofits for housing from the American Rescue Plan, which is based upon COVID. Funding proposals, we have already submitted general funding proposals to the administration. And then the fourth area that would be of great concern to us is trees and green infrastructure. And that includes tree planting, depaving, green infrastructure, soil restoration, and native plants to support diversity, land preservation, or preservation of existing natural areas. Funding proposals have been provided to the administration in general. And so I'll work with Robert in terms of anything specific he knows that we aren't aware of since our last meetings. So I just wanted you to be aware of those things. We plan for the second part of this meeting to have a discussion and presentations around, where the Biden administration really stands on climate up until now. And Greg and Julie have been having conversations on that. Julie, you want to start us out? And Jill, I see your hand up, and I'm sorry we couldn't get you in there. We had that real limitation. You spoke to it a bit. Okay, so thank you. Julie.
I just want to comment to Jill Ferguson, who's online here with us and has been very involved in the Line 3 demonstrations, that I would like to call on you a little bit later after we finish this section just to say a few words. So you will definitely be recognized here. So the Biden administration came out right in the first couple of days that he took office was some very dramatic actions on climate. Number one, he had the United States rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, which Trump had left. And so that was, especially important on both a national and an international level. He also immediately halted Keystone XL pipelines construction. Now that was also a dramatic move because there had been so much publicity and so many demonstrations and so many arrests and personal sacrifice around that issue in this country, led by our indigenous tribal peoples, but also many of climate activists, and I'm sure you may know some who were there. Some of you may have been up there at Standing Rock. So those were very dramatic to open up his administration. Then he went on to do some other good things within the next couple of weeks or so. He ordered a 60-day suspension of all new oil and gas drilling permits for US lands and waters, including the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Now that, as we mentioned earlier, has been reversed. However, that was ordered initially. He also pledged to rely on science to ensure access to clean air and water, hold polluters accountable, and reduce greenhouse emissions. He stopped the construction of US southern wall along the border of Mexico. And that actually environmental act. That wall has huge impact environmentally on the wildlife, especially on the wildlife in that region, as well as the people who live there. So that was a big move. And then he went on with an executive order reaffirming a commitment to tribal sovereignty, which is really important now with this Line 3 issue again. He established the Office of Domestic Climate Policy and a National Climate Task Force and an Environmental Justice Council to address environmental and climate impacts on disadvantaged communities. Now, compared to the Trump administration, these were dramatic acts. 1/3 of US land and water and ocean will now be protected space. He introduced a plan to ditch all combustion engines that powered government vehicles, so that all government vehicles would be electric powered. He put an emphasis on jobs, putting people to work. In fact, one of his favorite quotes is, "When I think of climate change, I think of jobs." Biden has said that a lot. He also made two very good appointments. Gina McCarthy as his climate advisor. She had worked as the director of the National Resources Defense Council before she came on board with the administration. And he appointed Deb Haaland, who was a representative from New Mexico and from the Pueblo tribe, as Secretary of the Interior. It was a very important appointment. Now, none of this is going to be easygoing with Congress, none of these plans. And in fact, Todd Stern, who was the lead negotiator for the Paris Climate Agreement, said, quote, "Congress is the last bastion of climate denialism left in America." And Representative Leader Chuck Schumer said, "Biden could do more unilaterally without Congress if he declared a state of climate emergency. If there ever was an emergency, climate is it," end of quote. Now, Robert Montgomery mentioned that issue also about the things that Biden can do with executive orders or unilaterally without Congress. But some of them have been challenged. Now, one of them that was challenged was his declaration early on about stopping all of the of oil and gas on federal lands and federal waters. That was challenged in just about a month ago or less. A judge, it was just last month, a judge blocked the temporary suspension of drilling oil on public land. And so it has been continuing. And also those fossil fuel already were under lease for drilling on public lands were not affected by that suspension, have been continuing. So what happens is that Biden's initial executive orders for the government sound really good, both at home and abroad. His plans included putting the climate crisis at the center of foreign policy and national security considerations, taking a total holistic look at the government approach to addressing climate, that every department and every agency had to keep climate in focus with all of their decisions. Also, rebuilding our infrastructure for a sustainable economy, thus this new infrastructure bill that they're considering now. Advancing conservation, agriculture, and reforestation. initiating a new civilian climate corps, revitalizing our energy systems, going into alternative modes, and securing environmental justice and economic opportunity. Problem is, a lot of those actions take congressional action, congressional proposals and legislation. One of the dramatic things that Biden was able to accomplish, which he had said he would do, is to hold an historic climate crisis summit with 40 world leaders and representatives from indigenous communities and international organizations. And that happened in mid-April. And at that summit, there were a number of things that were announced. First of all, Biden announced that the US will target reducing emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030, compared to 2005 levels. Those levels that they're compared to are always very keep in mind. And he wants to reach net zero by 2050. He announced that he wanted to lead a clean energy revolution and create good paying union jobs, emphasize environmental justice, working to help those hit the hardest by climate impacts. He had huge proposals and commitments for the international cooperation on climate crisis. First of all, globally, to set net zero strategies around the planet, ambitious benchmarks for climate investments, green government initiatives, international financing for climate adaptation and transition, not for the fossil fuel industry. An international climate finance plan, accelerated action on alternative energy systems internationally, support clear energy mineral supply chains, zero emission transportation resolution at home and abroad. And that would include shipping and aviation. He talked a lot about agriculture and the innovation of that for climate, not specifically in general. Global power system transformations, support of small modular nuclear reactors. Well, that's very controversial amongst many of us in the environmental movement. Then the adaptation and resilience to climate change, and protecting and implementing nature-based solutions and carbon sinks for climate change. One thing that came up in some recent news was the very strong concern from progressive groups and individuals about the new Cold War with China. And Biden is very strong on being critical with China and setting really as our enemy. And it's a huge climate threat. And the connection between this international relationship with China and the climate threat is one that cannot be easily overlooked, because both countries are such leaders in the emissions of fossil fuels. And this cooperation on addressing the climate crisis between these two nations is critical and essential for the future of our planet. So addressing humanitarian concerns that we have with China without losing cooperation on climate change is going to be a real challenge, but is one we really have to push Biden on, that we cannot put ourselves in a position of conflict, of war, and of a new international weapons race, especially the nuclear weapons race that we are already launching ourselves with a very strong effort for trillions of dollars of new nuclear weapons. And we can't confront either Russia or China on that level and still work together to solve these climate crisis issues that the whole world depends on. So that's something that I think we need to address with our Congress people, with Congresswoman Moore, as to her positions on our international relations with China in particular, and as it affects the climate issue. So those are about the main issues that I have been thinking about and researching. And I would think that the China issue and this oil drilling issue they're both very important, drilling on public lands. And then the Line 3, which really puts us close to home, because this Line 3 comes down from Alberta, Canada, the tar sands fields through Minnesota, and to Superior, Wisconsin, where there is a processing plants and refinement plants before it is shipped out on Lake Superior and into other pipeline systems. So this tar sands oil is the dirtiest and the most expensive and takes the most energy to process of any source of oil. And the whole point is we can't be producing more oil. If we produce it, we're going to burn it, and that's going to create more fossil fuels, more greenhouse gases, and we cannot save the planet and continue on this path. So,
Julie?
If there's any questions, first of all.
Well, why not segue to Jill, since you just talked about Line 3?
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jill, if you'd like to kind of take on this Line 3 issue at this point.
Yeah, I very much would.